Hello, my name is Pam Stock. Today I'm going to be talking about the ethnobotany of Boone County, Illinois in the 1800s and plants used by the Potawatomi in Winnebago. Plants were used for food, fiber, medicine, and ceremony. And plants were considered animate beings, and their names reflected physical features about the plant or uses for the plant, or if they were poisonous. This is Muscomin. Muscomin means raspberry, and because it was considered an animate being, it had different names that would reflect where it was in its life. So Muscominek means it is an active growing being on a plant, and as soon as it's picked, it becomes inanimate, and then it would be called Muscominen. The berries were dried in the sun and saved for winter, and not just the berries of raspberry, but all different berries that they would have gathered. Another food plant would have been the sugar maple, and this is maple sugar. And they would also have made maple syrup, and they would have taken the maple syrup and made vinegar. The vinegar was used to help cook gaminess out of food such as venison. The maple sugar was the main seasoner in their foods, and they did not have salt and pepper like we do, so they used sugar to enhance the flavors of the foods. Some of the other plants that they would have used for food and also fiber would have been cattail. And cattail mats were used to line the inside of wigwams to keep them insulated in the winter. They also used a cattail, the shoots and the roots for food. The pollen was used to make breads, and the fluff would have been used for putting on burns. It was also used in cradle boards for babies to keep them dry, and they also used the fluff for medicine to draw out old sores and get some of the infection out. Basswood would have been used to make cordage that would have been used for the cattail mats along the edge to sew them together. And then a thicker cord would have been used to lash the inner frame of the wigwam. Some of the other plants that they used would have been Kentucky coffee tree. So the pod of the Kentucky coffee tree was used for medicine and food. The seeds were taken out, they were dried, they were roasted and then ground, and that was then made into a coffee-like drink. The gum inside, which is actually considered poisonous, was used as a medicine, and that was used by the most experienced healers, and they would have used it to treat severe mental illness. Smooth sumac was used, the root, a decoction, was used and taken as an appetizer for people who were invalids and didn't have much of an appetite, and it kind of stimulated that. The berries were used in summer with maple sugar to have a lemonade-like drink, and the root was used for yellow dye, and the red leaves were dried and smoked. Wild bergamot, a decoction of the leaves, were used on pimples, and it helped get them to dry up. White snake root was used in sweat baths, so that would have been a ceremonial. It was used as a steam and then as a smudge. And it was also used as a smudge to revive people who were unconscious. So they would burn the leaves, and then they would blow the smoke into the person's face to wake them up. Goldenrod and infusion of the blossoms was used for fevers. Cup plant and infusion of the root was used to alleviate morning sickness or to prevent premature birth. It was used to reduce profuse menstruation. The root was used as smoke treatment for rheumatism and colds. The rootstock was also used in a vapor bath for colds. Black walnut was used to make dye, and they would take the green pods, they would crush them, they would put them in water for about a week, and then the resulting brown dye was used for dyeing leather and cloth. The inner bark was used as a physic, which means it was used to cleanse the bowels. Syrup was made with the inner bark as a blood tonic. They took maple syrup or maple sugar, and they made a syrup, and they cooked it down till it was almost like molasses, and then they would take that for a blood tonic. The nuts were used to make soup. They were eaten plain or with honey, and the black wood and the bark were charred to make the best black dye. Joe Pye weed, a poultice of the fresh leaves, were applied to burns. Roots were used to clear up afterbirth, and the flowering tops were used as a good luck charm for gambling. Nodding wild onion, a bulb was used to flavor foods, and it was also eaten raw. Horsetail, or scouring rush, an infusion of the whole plant was taken for gonorrhea, and the plant was fed to ponies to make them fat in a week. And it was also used to scour pots and pans. Black-eyed Susan, an infusion of the root, was used for colds. The dye made yellow dye, and the disc florets were used to dye the cattail mat. So I have created this handout, and I used a lot of different resources to make this. I have been researching for years, so I've gone online, I've read books from the 1800s and taken different resource books like Daniel Moorman's ethnobotany books. Robin Wall Kimmerer has wonderful books that talks about the relationship of plants and people. Braiding sweetgrass, gathering moss. Jim Thunder wrote a book that talks about the names of the plants and how to pronounce them in Potawatomi. He also teaches Potawatomi language. And Mary Genias was actually a graduate student who worked with a woman who was a Anishinaabe healer, and she was also a botany professor. So she learned a lot from her and wrote a book about that, so that's helpful too. You could take this handout and you can go to different Boone County Conservation District areas and look for the plants, and then you can find the Latin name, the common name, and you can look at what the uses were. Thank you for watching my video. Information presented in this video is for historical knowledge only and is not intended for modern day medical advice.
Conservation District as the Director of Natural Resources. The Boone County Conservation District manages over 3,800 acres, most of those acres set aside for passive recreation activities and wildlife habitat. It's the responsibility of the Natural Resources Management Department, for which I work within, to manage all the acres set aside for wildlife habitat. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the natural history of Boone County, how Boone County was formed, some of the native peoples that lived on here on these lands before European settlers, touch a little bit about European settlement, and then talk to you about the different habitat types within Boone County. There were two glacial episodes in Boone County that are responsible for the landscape that we see today. The first one receded 130,000 years ago. This was the Illinois glacial episode. And the second most recent glacial episode, the Wisconsin, receded 13,000 years ago. After these glaciers receded, native people moved into the area. The Fox tribe is the tribe that we think has been here the longest, and they descended from a prehistoric woodland tribe. So the Fox tribe here for a long, long time. And then in the late 1700s, the Potawatomi tribe moved into this area from the east and the north. So as European settlers settled North America, marching from east to west, native tribes kept getting pushed farther west and west. So the Potawatomi got here late 1700s. In 1832, a pretty big turning point here in Boone County and a lot of northern Illinois, the Black Hawk War. It was a short war, April through August, but after the completion of that war, most of the native peoples were out of this area and ended up on the other side, west of the Mississippi River. In 1835, a survey crew came into Boone County and gridded out the landscape. And this is when things started to change quickly. Most of Boone County was purchased by European settlers between 1835 and 1839. This is when the landscape changed abruptly. Natural process was taken out of the scenario, and towns and villages, cities started to expand, roads were installed, and agriculture started to change the landscape. When this happened, biodiversity and a lot of the native habitats in this area started to disappear pretty quickly. We still do have habitats scattered through Boone County. The Boone County Conservation District manages a large portion of those, and I'm going to talk to you right now about what those habitat types are. I'm going to start with wetlands. In Boone County, most of our wetlands were considered sedge meadows. A sedge is a grass-like plant. It's not exactly a grass, it's a little more complicated than that, but our wetlands tended to be dominated by these sedges. Along with sedges were also broadleaf, herbaceous wildflowers. So you would have sedge domination, but you'd also have a lot of wildflowers blooming through a growing season. And wetlands are pretty much self-explanatory. They're going to be wet most of the year. Water could be pooling at the surface, but the soils are going to be saturated most of the year. The next habitat type is a grassland or a prairie. These are going to be wide open areas, not a lot of trees or shrubs, and grass dominated. But again, along with these grasses were the herbaceous wildflowers. Very diverse. Through the growing season, call it April, May into October, something new would constantly be blooming. Next habitat I'm going to touch on are oak savannas. Oak savannas are probably one of the most threatened and endangered habitat types on the entire planet. For two main reasons, invasive species and easily converted to agriculture. So invasive species are taking over a lot of our habitats, but for some reason oak savannas really take a beating from them. So when Europeans moved here from Europe, they brought a lot of the things that they were familiar with, felt comfortable with, and a lot of these were seeds brought over from Europe and Asia. These plants, these seeds don't have the natural checks and balances that a plant native to North America would have, so they can easily outcompete our more conservative plant species. So in Boone County, our savannas were dominated by oaks and hickories. This is probably one of the most diverse habitats in the county because it was a blend of sun and shade. So you got species that could tolerate shade or needed shade, and you also had the species that could tolerate a lot of sun or needed full sun. So it would be a matrix of all of these species kind of finding their niche within the sun and the shade of a savanna. So it's not going to be complete closed canopy. It's going to be maybe 20 to 50% shade versus sun. Next one I want to talk about are edge habitats or transition zones. And these are basically this place between habitats, so that space between a savanna and a grassland or a savanna and a woodland. Pretty important habitats. A lot of different species like to hang out there, especially birds. And the last one I want to touch on are riparian woodlands. Riparian woodland is a woodland that grows along a river and stream. And in Boone County, our riparian woodlands tended to be along the Kishwaukee River. And there, when most people think of a woodland, this is what they kind of envision. It's a more closed canopy woodland. So if you're in there in the summertime and you look up, you're gonna just see leaves closing in on you, very closed canopy. The Boone County Conservation District utilizes volunteers a lot in the work that we do. The habitat management that happens here, volunteers help with a lot. Every Tuesday we have a volunteer day and we play the weather a little bit. So when the weather's nice, spring, summer, fall, we're out in the mornings, and then late fall into winter, we're out in the afternoons. And what we're doing is we're collecting native seed, collecting that, bringing it back to our facility, cleaning it, creating seed mixes to expand our habitats, to expand the diversity on the landscape. Along with collecting native seeds, we're also doing a lot of invasive species removal. All these invasive species that were brought over from Europe and Asia, which outcompete our more conservative natives, need to be held in check. And we do that a lot of different ways, and one of those ways is using volunteer help to go in and clip and pull these species to remove them, collecting the invasive seeds so they're not spreading on the landscape, overpowering our natives. So if you're interested in this type of work, we'd be happy to have you. And if you don't have any experience but you want to learn, we're willing to teach you as long as you're willing to help. So those are the habitat types in Boone County. They're scattered throughout. If you're interested in learning more about these habitats, or if you're interested in helping us manage these habitats, please contact me at our website, bccdil.org, and thank you very much for watching. Hello, my name is Josh Sage. I work here at the Boone County Conservation District.
Okay, Josh, I'm going to
Taking over.
allow you to do this. Hold on a second. You're there, I believe. Okay, your presentation is up. All right.
Hi, everybody. Like to add a little bit to the video presentation, more about the natural history of Boone County. It's not, there we go. This map was created by the Illinois State Geological Survey, and it's a really good one that shows the last glacial episode to come into Illinois, the Wisconsin. And from the map, you can see that the terminal moraine is in McHenry County. The actual glacier never touched Boone County, but when the glacier receded, a lot of the melt coming off that glacier ran through Boone County, changing the landscape. I know when people see a bunch of dates put together, they glaze over, and that's okay. If a timeline is good for anything, it gives you a chronological order of things. So here's some major dates in Illinois and Boone County. 1818, Illinois becomes a state. 1832, a major, like I said in the video, a major turning point in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. When Black Hawk got pushed to the other side of the Mississippi by the Bad Axe River, it was pretty much over for the Native Americans. And by 1835, almost all Native Americans were pushed into Iowa and then again eventually pushed into Kansas. So 1836, Boone County was surveyed. And by 1839, all of Boone County was broken up into two land districts, the Galena and the Chicago. And shortly after that happened, lands went directly into settlers' hands. There wasn't much, if any, land speculation going on, right from the district to the people who are going to work the land. If you know anything about Boone County, you know we love our fair. Boone County Fair, one of the biggest in the state. We did not mess around. We got a jump start. 1855, 1856, Agricultural Society was formed, and shortly 1856 we had a fair up and running. From reading and talking to historians, it sounds like there have been three places the fair has been. The first one would have been kind of between where the Belvedere Cemetery and Business 20 or State Street through Belvedere is. And then in 1867, it moved to where Spencer Conservation area is today. Spencer Conservation Area along the Kishwaukee River. And there's a gravel loop that'll kind of, you can drive your car and it takes you along the bank of the Kishwaukee River. That's the old racetrack to the fairgrounds. And then in 1967, it moved to its current location north of Belvedere. So by 1877, log cabins are no longer being built. Sod outbuildings are no longer being constructed. Everything is built out of either milled lumber or brick. If you're interested in learning more of natural history of your area, of your county, books like this exist. The one on the left is the one I use, Past and Present of Boone County, published in 1877. And then I've been told the go-to for Rockford and Winnebago is the one by Charles Church. I've not read it, but I hear it's full of valuable information. So when the surveyors moved out of Boone County, this is what they left. You can see Belvedere and Bonus townships. So the Kishwaukee River runs through Bonus into Belvedere Township and then into Winnebago. Everything south of the Kish, so Flora and Spring Township, pretty wide open. And then everything north would have been riparian woodland, savanna, and then pockets of grassland. And when you read about the townships of Boone County, it's always Spring Township and Flora Township where they talk about the biota, the biological diversity. A couple quotes from that, the Past and Present of Boone County, talking about those two townships. Spring Township, the name of the township is derived from great primitive beauty in springtime and was so christened when the township organization system was adopted. So I live in an old farmhouse that was built in 1875. And whenever I'm digging a hole on my property, replacing a fence post, whatever, I dig about a foot down into the ground and it fills with water. I assumed that's why, because the water table was so shallow there, and I was obviously wrong. And then Flora Township, the name of this township is derived from the primitive beauty of the landscape. Originally, it was an open, rather undulating prairie. In springtime, it was bedecked and bespangled with myriads of flowers of every conceivable hue and color, the admiration of every beholder. I'll bet it was a sight to see, and that's some serious writing. We just don't write like that anymore. So this map here sits above my desk, and it was created by Roger Gustafson, the first director of the Boone County Conservation District. Side note, the Boone County Conservation District is the first conservation district in the state. Roger created this map, And you can see the Kishwaukee River in the bottom third of the map, and everything south of that in green, pretty wide open grassland. And then to the north, you can see pockets of grassland amongst savanna and probably riparian woodland. I'd like to talk a little bit about pre-settlement conditions versus today's conditions. And when I say pre-settlement, I'm going to probably use the word remnant a lot. Grasslands, remnant grasslands in Boone County are almost zero. There's one that I know of that I'll be talking about shortly. Most of these grasslands were converted to conventional agriculture, pastured in just weedy succession at this point, if they still exist. Wetlands almost have all been drained or taken over by invasive species, and oak savannas and woodlands pretty much logged out or outcompeted by invasive species. That is an aerial photograph from 1941. The first aerials of Boone County were taken in 1941, and that circle is Flora Prairie Nature Preserve. I'm guessing some people in this Zoom meeting have been to Flora. Flora Prairie is in Flora Township. It's managed by the Boone County Conservation District, and the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission kind of oversees management as well. It resembles pre-settlement. That little savanna is still there, open prairie all around. That parking lot is where you park to go up into Flora. This is the only remnant prairie I know of in the county. So wetlands, Ben Davies did a program for wild ones back, I suppose, late spring, early summer. And he sent me this photograph a while ago, and it kind of resonated with me. And I thought this group would get a kick out of this. Wetlands can be kind of funny when we're trying to restore them. So in 2019, this area in the picture was a complete monoculture of reed canary grass. And Ben really enjoys killing reed canary grass. So I was using that to my advantage. So we were out at this site, noticed there was remnant surrounding it. So we went out once with a full spectrum herbicide, sprayed it, and it's like, what's the worst that could happen? More reed canary comes up, right? And fortunately, I mean, you can see from the picture, you've got some angelica in the foreground, sedges filling in, a bunch of blue vervain in the back. If given a push in the right direction, sometimes you get lucky and wetlands can repair themselves. They just needed that push. They needed that monoculture, that just suffocating layer to be removed to kind of release them. Kind of a win, make you feel good. And wetlands, I think what's happening is the wet conditions of a wetland kind of preserve that native seed bank, and once released, this could happen. I mean, our RCG reed canary is going to probably push back in there, and it's going to be constant treatment, but pretty good results. Oak savannas, people refer to as the old woodlot or the back 40. When you drive through Boone County, you see these postage stamps, and you can almost put the puzzle together in your mind of these big expansive oaks with branches that are stretched out. You can tell when they were 100, 200 years ago, there was nothing around them and they could stretch out. They didn't have to grow straight up. But now it's just choked out. There's no middle story. The understory is honeysuckle and buckthorn and rubus and garlic mustard. The conservation district is doing our best to clear out as many of these as we can, hoping to get oak regeneration. Oaks need light to germinate. And if you've got climax oaks with nothing but honeysuckle and buckthorn, you're not going to get any oak regen. So we need to start clearing these understories, trying to get oak regen, trying to get a middle story established. This picture is of Distillery, 1941. I've been working this site for over 20 years. we've opened it up a lot, not that much, but you can see just the savanna, the woodland, and just the openness of it all. This might be my favorite slide. Piscataway Fen Conservation Area. If you haven't been there, what are you waiting for, right? Two pictures side by side, same area, 1941. You can see the savanna in the upper left corner of each picture. They're pretty much identical, and I feel pretty confident in saying the habitat in 2021 is probably even higher quality habitat than 1941, because a lot of where you can see conventional row agriculture, those areas have been converted back into natives. So very diverse plantings, lots of native blooms. I recommend, if you haven't been out, going out. That savanna in the upper left corner, yellow trout lily, and the biggest population of shooting stars I know of in the county.
Yellow trout.
Last aerial, I think, Kinnickinnick Creek Conservation Area. Again, an aerial from 1941. What you're looking at is basically nature preserve. That's our second nature preserve, co-managed with the Nature Preserves Commission. You can kind of see the creek essing through the picture, and then really tight oak hickory woodland along the creek, and then it kind of opens up a little bit. Really good spring ephemerals here as well. I think Brian Hale does a walk here, wildflower walks here a lot, looking at spring ephemerals. So my last slide about a guy named John Towers. Traveled here from New York with a short stop in Michigan. He was on his way to the Rock River, spent the night on the Kish in what's today Belvedere, with his group. Woke up in the morning. Others expecting paradise on Rock River may go there. I go no further. I think I'd get along with John. I might be a little biased. But shortly after that, he purchased 2 claims and had property on both sides of the Kishwaukee River. That's all I have to add. I can take any questions. We can open up for discussion. But thank you very much for having me. I'll give Janet her computer back.
Okay, we can take questions for both Pam and Josh, and you can do this 2 ways. You can either go to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, your Zoom screen, and put it into a chat, and then we'll read that to Josh or Pam, say which one you want. Or you can just unmute yourself and just speak, ask your questions. We probably won't stumble over each other, but if we do, we'll have to referee that. So if you have any questions for either Pam or Josh, I have a couple questions. I have one question for both of you about getting copies of some of the publications that both of you mentioned on ethnobotany and on the history of Boone County. We do keep a library for wild ones, so those might be good references to have. So if you could send us that information or put it in the chat, we'd appreciate it.
Do that. Be
Yeah.
careful what you ask for.
Okay. Maybe they're in your massive tome that I haven't printed out yet.
There's just a few, but I can send you a list.
Okay.
Hi, Doug Dufford. Have a question for Josh. Josh, do you know where that Towers property was?
I don't. I really don't. I probably should find out. George Thomas, who's a board member, Boone County historian, would probably be the guy that could tell me.
I know that in one of the books, it does tell where who he bought the land from and where it was. So And I don't know if from their names that we could find out exactly where they were.
There is to look up the reference, but every county has a map that shows who bought the original, or who originally bought the tracks from the government, their names and locations. That's information's online. Jenny, did you have a question?
Am I muted?
No?
Okay. I just was wondering if Josh, do you collect the seeds from your natural areas, and is it possible to buy a representative collection of the seeds from those areas?
We do a lot of seed collection. I have the totals in front of me. 2020, we collected 676 pounds for a market value of $91,000. And every bit of that goes back onto our lands. We frost seeded 85 acres this winter. And the bulk of that went out. So we don't sell seed. We end up having to buy seed more than sell it. But yeah.
But you do seed exchange with other conservation groups like Park District, don't you?
Yeah, Aaron Minson, my cohort, there's a Northern Illinois seed exchange, and it's groups like the Conservation District, Forest Preserves, Park Districts get together and kind of swap seed, and there's a lot of planning ahead of time on who needs what and what species we should be focusing on.
Any more questions? I don't see anything in chat.
This is Dennis McFall. Joshua, we had a speaker about a year and a half ago, I think, with Wild Ones from the McHenry County Conservation District. And he had actually had a project where he straightened out the Nippersink. And I thought it was pretty amazing. He said within a couple of years, all the animals came back. He had salamanders and otters and everything living back in the Nippersink. Are you having that kind of luck with your rehabs in Boone County?
Was that Ed Collins with the
Yes,
remanding of
that's what it was. Yep.
We've never taken on a project like that. That was a pretty intense project, but we do notice fauna tends to come back into our natural areas. We're focusing heavy right now on pollinators because they're taking such a beating, and we're really focused now on the rusty patch bumblebee, and we're finding these species here, and every time we would go out, we would find them, and I thought to myself, how is this endangered? We're finding them all over, but when you get to talking to the feds, the only places they're finding them are here. So if that species is going to recover, it's probably going to happen in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. So from a pollinator standpoint, these habitats we're creating are helping them significantly because they're getting that nectar through a growing season, right? That's key. But when it comes to fish and mussels, I'm no expert. Land managers really aren't an expert in anything. Jack of all trades, master of none. But I leave it to the DNR to do stuff that heavy, like fish and mussels. I like going out and helping them, but I'm in no position to talk as an expert.
Josh, we have a question. Would Boone County Conservation District benefit from volunteers collecting data for the calling frog surveys?
Yeah, especially if we had someone knowledgeable. Yes, I would like to give that person my contact information. Yeah.
And
Barry, can you hear me?
yeah, Paul, go ahead.
When we drive from our place and we head up to Lake Geneva, we take Highway 173 west, heading east through Caledonia.
Okay.
And then I'm looking at this little map. There's a park on, is that your area? Is that in Boone County?
It's right on
There's-
173.
There's a park,
Is it north of
it's on the north side. And the
Route
park is on the north side of the road and there's a creek there. And on the south side of the road, it's like comparing landscapes 180 degrees opposite of one another. You have
Is
a
it-
beautiful forest preserve on the north side of the road, and on the south, the farmer is there, allows grazing of his cattle all the way down into the creek bottom. And it
Yeah.
just totally decimated that area. And it's one of the greatest contrasts that I've ever seen. And I wonder if there's any plans on trying to buy that guy's farm and recreate what you have on the north side and get those cattle out of there.
Not no, no. That's not on our radar. I think you're referring to Tuttle Clarkson Natural Area, which is pretty high quality sedge meadow. But yeah, no, nothing. There's no willing seller at this point.
Yeah, it's a pitiful sight.
I did see something come up about frost seeding with a question mark.
Yes.
I could explain that really quick. Frost seeding is within the last 10 years, I think all land management agencies that have turned to this. We're laying all our native seed down in the wintertime. I prefer snow, and we're using broadcasters and tractors and humans with buckets, and we go out and we spread native seed on the project area. Depending on the project, we're anywhere from 80 to 120 seeds per square foot. And when you've got that white snow on the ground, you can calibrate your hand or your seeder to get proper dispersal through an area. And at the same time, if you can time it right, if the sun's out or there's more snow coming, the seed warms up in the sun and it melts, or the snow covers it, and that seed is protected from predation. And also natural stratification can happen, and which hopefully is coming soon, our freeze thaw cycles tend to plant those native seeds where they belong at the proper depth. When I first started doing this work in full-time 2001, I would take my Truax seed drill that I loved, and then I'd wonder why all I did was get stands of big blue stem. And it's because we were seeding our grasses too heavy and we were planting our forb seeds too deep. So frost seeding eliminates that. We don't put as much tall grass in, and we put as many forbs as we can collect and afford into our mixes. And it works really well.
You have to have snow on the ground to do that, right?
You don't. I prefer it because I can get my calibration down, Pat. I seeded 85 acres in early January in like a week and a half. I would get snow. I'd plant, snow would cover that first. I'd come in again. It was perfect conditions. So a lot of people, if you've got better equipment than me, can get away with it, but I prefer snow.
Any more questions for Pam or Josh?
This is Steve Sims. I did about a quarter acre of what you call snow seeding in 2 different batches in January. And I'm just waiting to see what happens, but it is so easy to toss that seed out when you can see exactly where it's landing and how dense it is. So it's sort of a thrifty way to make use of your seed as well.
Yeah, it's pretty great. It's embarrassing how long it took us to figure it out, but yeah, it's perfect.
Well, I got the clue from the seed source up in southern Minnesota.
Oh, Prairie Moon.
Prairie Moon, yeah.
I don't know, this is Mark Luthen. I don't know if I mentioned that Pam's creation that she made, she shared it with us, and there is a link on the newsletter that was sent out this week. And it's also on the Wild Ones website. So you don't need to memorize it. You don't even need to print it. It's available online. And I want to thank Pam for sharing that with us, all her hard work. And I'd like to thank Josh as well. I know those areas that he's talking about quite well after retiring a couple years ago and being able to spend Tuesdays with him. So.
One of the things I found out while preparing for this is that I'm going to have to update my handout because I found out that there in the village that was located in Spencer Park, there were also Menominee people living in the 1823 time period. So they were living with the Potawatomi in Boone County.
I found out that we're right where at least 3 major tribes converged. We're here on the Rock, at the confluence of the Kishwaukee and the Rock River.
Yes.
And there were Chippewa, Menominee, sometimes Fox,
Potawatomi.
and
Ottawa.
Potawatomi and Ottawa. They're all would come to the Kishwaukee River for summer powwows. That's in the historical record too.
Yeah, there was a village right where the Kish and the Rock River met, and it was called Kiskakawa. And that was the one where there were all different tribes living together for a certain period of time. But they did say that the village that was in Boone County in Belvedere, in Spencer Park area, there were 60 Menominee and Potawatomi people living there.
Jenny, did you have another question?
No, I didn't. I could just maybe make a comment. I tried the frost planting or spreading of seed this fall, so I'm real anxious to see if it works.
Good. Well, if there are no more questions, I want to thank Mark for getting the meeting set up tonight, the program set up, and thank Josh and Pam for your wonderful presentations, and Janet again for running the Zoom links. I remind you that the next meeting will be on March 18th, and it'll be Peggy Doty with talking about our native woodpeckers and what their habitat needs are. And remind you again that we'll be looking for volunteers for our native plant sale for May 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th and 8th. So start blocking out time on your calendar to help with that. That's our biggest fundraiser for the year. And I think, Janet, we're probably all ready to.
Yeah, the recording will become available within a week or so on our website. We'll have to do a little bit of editing, but look for it, I would say, more toward the end of February or the beginning of March. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a great evening. I'm going to stop the recording. Bye-bye.
My name is Pam Stock. Today I'm going to be talking about the ethnobotany of Boone County, Illinois in the 1800s and plants used by the Potawatomi in Winnebago. Plants were used for food, fiber, medicine, and ceremony. And plants were considered animate beings, and their names reflected physical features about the plant or uses for the plant, or if they were poisonous. This is Muskomen. Muskomen means raspberry, and because it was considered an animate being, it had different names that would reflect where it was in its life. So Muskomenek means it is an active growing being on a plant, And as soon as it's picked, it becomes inanimate, and then it would be called Miscomanen. The berries were dried in the sun and saved for winter, and not just the berries of raspberry, but all different berries that they would have gathered. Another food plant would have been the sugar maple, and this is maple sugar. And they would also have made maple syrup, and they would have taken the maple syrup and made vinegar. The vinegar was used to help cook gaminess out of food such as venison. The maple sugar was the main seasoner in their foods, and they did not have salt and pepper like we do, so they used sugar to enhance the flavors of the foods. Some of the other plants that they would have used for food and also fiber would have been cattail. And cattail mats were used to line the inside of wigwams to keep them insulated in the winter. They also used a cattail, the shoots and the roots for food. The pollen was used to make breads, and the fluff would have been used for putting on burns. It was also used in cradle boards for babies to keep them dry, and they also used the fluff for medicine to draw out old sores and get some of the infection out. Basswood would have been used to make cordage that would have been used for the cattail mats along the edge to sew them together. And then a thicker cord would have been used to lash the inner frame of the wigwam. Some of the other plants that they used would have been Kentucky coffee tree. So the pod of the Kentucky coffee tree was used for medicine and food. The seeds were taken out, they were dried, they were roasted and then ground, and that was then made into a coffee-like drink. The gum inside, which is actually considered poisonous, was used as a medicine, and that was used by the most experienced healers, and they would have used it to treat severe mental illness. Smooth sumac was used, the root, a decoction, was used and taken as an appetizer for people who were invalids and didn't have much of an appetite, and it kind of stimulated that. The berries were used in summer with maple sugar to have a lemonade-like drink, and the root was used for yellow dye, and the red leaves were dried and smoked. Wild bergamot, a decoction of the leaves, were used on pimples, and it helped get them to dry up. White snake root was used in sweat baths, so that would have been a ceremonial. It was used as a steam and then as a smudge, and it was also used as a smudge to revive people who were unconscious. So they would burn the leaves and then they would blow the smoke into the person's face to wake them up. Goldenrod, an infusion of the blossoms, was used for fevers. Cup plant, an infusion of the root, was used to alleviate morning sickness or to prevent premature birth. It was used to reduce profuse menstruation. The root was used as smoke treatment for rheumatism and colds. The rootstock was also used in a vapor bath for colds. Black walnut was used to make dye, and they would take the green pods They would crush them, they would put them in water for about a week, and then the resulting brown dye was used for dyeing leather and cloth. The inner bark was used as a physic, which means it was used to cleanse the bowels. Syrup was made with the inner bark as a blood tonic. They took maple syrup or maple sugar, and they made a syrup. And they cooked it down till it was almost like molasses, and then they would take that for a blood tonic. The nuts were used to make soup. They were eaten plain or with honey. And the black wood and the bark were charred to make the best black dye. Joe Pye weed, a poultice of the fresh leaves, were applied to burns. Roots were used to clear up afterbirth, and the flowering tops were used as a good luck charm for gambling. Nodding wild onion, a bulb was used to flavor foods, and it was also eaten raw. Horsetail, or scouring rush, an infusion of the whole plant was taken for gonorrhea, and the plant was fed to ponies to make them fat in a week. And it was also used to scour pots and pans. Black-eyed Susan, an infusion of the root, was used for colds. The dye made yellow dye, and the disc florets were used to dye the cattail mat. So I have created this handout, and I used a lot of different resources to make this. I have been researching for years, so I've gone online, I've read books from the 1800s and taken different resource books like Daniel Moorman's ethnobotany books. Robin Wall Kimmerer has wonderful books that talks about the relationship of plants and people. Braiding sweetgrass, gathering moss. Jim Thunder wrote a book that talks about the names of the plants and how to pronounce them in Potawatomi. He also teaches Potawatomi language. And Mary Genias was actually a graduate student who worked with a woman who was a Anishinaabe healer, and she was also a botany professor. So she learned a lot from her and wrote a book about that, so that's helpful too. You can take this handout and you can go to different Boone County Conservation District areas and look for the plants, and then you can find the Latin name, the common name, and you can look at what the uses were. Thank you for watching my video. Information presented in this video is for historical knowledge only and is not intended for modern day medical advice.